Okay, so my name's Alex James. I'm a program manager on the data services team. I don't know what's going on with the screen. That's not good. It was showing a second ago. I've been having some problems with my display driver that are usually not related to projecting.
Here we go. Oh, it was flicking.
No, but yeah, okay. Funny, can you go and grab my presentation from Varmit's public Alex J, and then maybe we'll bring your laptop up just in case. Anyway, so while we're flickering and working out what's going on, yeah, as I was saying, my name's Alex James. I'm a program manager on the data services team at Microsoft, and I work specifically on the OData protocol. So, yeah, this isn't going to work, I can tell. So let's just disconnect that. And so what I want to, today what we want to do is kind of two things. I'm going to give you a kind of an introduction to OData, the protocol, just a kind of a high-level introduction, and we're going to do a bit of kind of digging into what the protocol enables and what the protocol's about and those sorts of things. Then we're going to take a break for about an hour while Christian from the data market team comes up and talks about data market, which will expose its data through the OData protocol. And then at about 3:45, Fanny and I are going to be doing a kind of a tutorial. In that tutorial, we're going to look at what we can do with OData. We're going to kind of, we were talking to Jan before the meeting, and we sort of, before this, and we thought, hey, what's an example scenario that some of you might actually do with some data, and and what would you need to do to turn that, to sort of expose that data in OData format, and what are the sort of things that would enable? So that's what the tutorial will be about this afternoon. No, that's 2010. Let's go back. Yes. I'm going to go and bring my docking station over, because I never have a problem with my docking station.
It's up there somewhere.
Yeah. So that's the one. Sorry about that, everyone. Technology working for the people or not, as the case may be. Wow. This machine is slower than that machine, but at least it projects. Okay, so without further ado, let's just jump into the introduction to OData. So OData is a protocol that's based on HTTP and Atom Pub, or Atom and Atom Pub, and also JSON, which is another format that we can use It's based on REST semantics, and that's really kind of almost like we get that for free because we're based on the Atom Pub protocol. Okay, Atom Pub is one of the first and best implementations of a RESTful protocol. And so we'll look at some of this stuff in detail in a little minute. Currently it's available under the open specification promise, but it is something that we are looking to do to turn it into a standard. We have been exploring this for some time, and we're coming closer to the end of our kind of journey of discovery there. Not there yet, but it's coming soon. And we try and keep the movement on the protocol as public as possible. So there is a website called odata.org, and when we think about adding features to the OData protocol, we usually start it off by throwing up a blog post which is a kind of a proposal, and we get feedback and so forth through our mailing lists. So we try to be as open as possible with the actual protocol. And what I want to show now is a quick demo of using, I don't know what looks like Fanny's looking at read it, so let's just ignore that for a second. I'm going to go off to Netflix and just show you the fact that they have some, it's the other way around, and show you the fact that they have an OData service set up for browsing around the Netflix data. Now, I know this is not scientific data, but it's useful because it makes it very easy to kind of see what's going on, because I think everybody's familiar with the concept of movies and titles and genres and so forth. So what we have here is an OData service, which has been popped up, and you can see we have a series of different places or different extents. That's the word that Tim used previously, which are exposed. So we've got the titles here. So this is where kind of like the movies are. We've got awards that a movie might win. We've got the people, which would be things, people like the actors, the directors, and so forth. And we've got genres and various other things. And because this is an OData feed, an OData service, we can start. We can actually go in and have a look at some of the data. So I can follow one of these, go into one of these collections and ask some questions. I'm going to go into genres here, and you can see what I get back is an atom payload with the genres in here. So each one of these entries represents a specific genre. And of course, I can actually start writing queries against that as well if I want to. So for example, I could, in here, I could say something like, to get back, what is going on with this keyboard? I'm not used to it, sorry. So I'm going to look for, is that an A under there? No, it's not. And I'm just pulling back an individual item here. Now, of course, depending on what query I wrote, if there were multiple results, I'd get back multiple results. I can also, you notice because it's atom, if there are relationships between things, in fact, there aren't any relationships in the genre feed, but if I went off to the titles, then you can see I've got all these links in this first title here. So the first title is this Red Hot Chili Peppers Funky Monks. And that's just a side effect of what was in their database and in what time and so on. And you can see I've got all the data about that thing down here, including the synopsis, rating, information about box art, and so forth. And I've also, but if you look a little bit further up, this is the atom way of creating relationships between data. So right here I've got links pointing off to different things. So this URL here is actually that title, the 13ALY, is the primary key for this particular title. And so what I'm doing there is I'm following a link. I'm going through this title and getting its audio formats. So if I'm interested in that, I could grab that URL and put that. I could grab this and put this up here. And bring back the audio format. So you can see we've got this in DVD. In DVD, that's all at the moment. So that's the essence of the protocol. At least it gives you a high-level view of things. It allows you to kind of navigate around. I can write queries against it, and we'll look at some of those query options in a little bit of time, in a bit more detail. Also, not everybody wants to consume Atom. So I've got to find Netflix. I've got to find Fiddler on this machine. Where is it, honey? Oh, there it is. Good. So if you want to get your data in a different format, you can do that as well. OData supports two formats. It supports Atom and it supports JSON. So JSON is JavaScript object notation. And it means that you can consume your results very easily inside JavaScript. And lots of people are writing JavaScript applications these days. So it's kind of handy. So what I'm going to do is just rerun this query over here, because I've got this tool up called Fiddler, which will capture the query. And hopefully, when I go in here, I'll be able to see, oh, there's the query that I ran. Okay, now if we look at the actual request, you can see that we're saying, hey, we want to accept application XML here. Okay, now what I can do though is I can go into the request builder, and I can drag this guy across here, and I can, let's just change what I'm going to accept. I'm going to say application/JSON. And then I'm going to execute that instead. And now this is the request that I sent to the server. And if I look at the raw response, you can see this is no longer XML that I'm getting back. I'm getting back JSON, and this is, if you're familiar with JavaScript programming, JSON is, you can just load those into objects and manipulate them through JavaScript very easily. So that's that's my kind of quick intro to fiddling around with OData and playing with it. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Now, so let's think about the features from sort of a cross-cutting all the way across the product, right? What does OData support? It has a data model. So when I first went to that Netflix service, we saw that what we call a service dot, which told me all the data feeds that were available. That's one way that I can sort of see the model of a service. There is another more detailed way, which is through this thing called $metadata. That will bring back what's called an EDM, or an entity data model, which gives you much more detail about the model. In fact, let's just go and do that against this guy here. So if I take that part off the URL and say $metadata here, I get back, this is an EDM, and it describes the data model of the service. And you can see here it tells me what is a type in the service called person. It tells me what properties they've got and what relationships they have as well. These are navigation properties of what we call relationships. And so I can look through this whole thing, and I've got very detailed understanding of how things work. And in fact, if you have an application, a programming environment, like say C# or some other programming language, often you will use the $metadata to generate classes that you can program against. Yep.
It's like WSDL for SOAP?
WSDL for
SOAP?
Yeah, similar.
Similar?
Similar,
So
yeah.
you can generate like the...
Sorry. So the question is this like WSDL for SOAP? And yeah, it's very similar. It gives you the same sort of capabilities. You can use it to generate a series of classes to help you manipulate your service. Often, and I'm imagining, often that might just be for read, but also, you can, because it's based on Atom Pub meaning publishing for short, means you can also publish as well through the protocol, so you can actually make changes too. So it gives you both parts.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
If I go to the service and I pull in this entity data model, what's the typical pathway between that and actually being able to write something that can go get a piece of that data? Do I just stare at the EDM, or how do I, as a...
So you're sort of helping me jump ahead in my talk a little bit. One of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit later on is about kind of the OData ecosystem and the tools and things that are available to you if you expose your data through the OData format. We at Microsoft have created a series of tools on the .NET framework. So WCF Data Services is specifically designed. It handles both sides of the equation. It handles the server side, so producing OData, and it also handles the client side, so consuming OData. And the way you do that is you just in Visual Studio you start building. You create a reference, a service reference to an OData service, and then it will go off and interrogate the $metadata and produce classes for you to manipulate. On other platforms, there are similar sorts of capabilities, but it really sort of depends on how far the person on that platform, we don't control those, has gone with implementing their feature set. But as I move forward, you'll see all the platforms that are available and supported so far. So as I was saying, we've got a data model which allows you to program against your service. We support these different formats. We support Atom, JSON, and then I've called these two out specifically, media resources and media link entries, because I don't know if you're familiar with the whole idea of back in sort of like the heyday of blogging, there was this idea of enclosures. so that when you did a blog post, you could put an enclosure with that blog post, which would maybe be a movie or some images that are associated with that thing. So Atom, being originally coming from that kind of blogging community, modeled this as something called media link entries and media resources. So the media resources is the equivalent of the enclosure, and the media link entry is the equivalent of the blog post. So the way to think about this is OData allows you to, so say I want to expose a series of streams of data, maybe movies or something like that. I would expose those as media resources, but the way I would get to them is via a media link entry, which would be the thing which would have the metadata about it. So if we kind of go back to that Netflix example, on the Netflix example, when I had the titles, you would think of those, if Netflix allowed you to get the resources, the actual movies themselves through the OData protocol, which they don't today, but if they did, they would model that as a media resource. So the movie itself would be the media resource, but the metadata about the movie, so things like the box art, the title of the movie, the genre, the actors, all that sort of stuff would be the media link entry. Now, of course, it's great that you've got this, this way to share data, but often you want to kind of control what you get. You want to write a query. And so that's where we have a series of different query options that are part of the OData standard. So, going from sort of left to right, filter allows you to constrain the rows that you get back. Select allows you to constrain the columns you get back. Order by changes the order of the rows. Count allows you to, instead of getting back the data, you can say, well, if I issued this query, what would the count be? Top and skip are used for paging, but that's kind of client-side paging. We support two modes of paging. The other one, this other thing called skip token, is to support a feature called server-side paging. And the reason why that's kind of useful is because often if you put up a service, and let's say you're responsible for the bandwidth and the CPU, paying for those resources, you'll get somebody coming up to your service and asking a question without thinking about paging at all. And if you've got a lot of data, you're just going to send a lot of data to them. And so that's probably not what you want to do. You want to allow, typically, if someone asks for every record in Netflix, you don't want to send them 100,000 movies. What you do instead is you turn on what we call server-driven paging. And server-driven paging allows the server to kind of send back just a sample of the data. And then if the client is really interested in all the data, they can follow what we call a next link to get more of the data. And they just keep, so they have to keep issuing requests to kind of get, so they get a chunk at a time. And then finally, inline count. This is used with server-driven paging. So if I issue a request to Netflix and I get back, and I'm asking for all the movies, and Netflix just gives me back 100, inline count is a way which I can say, hey, I know you're probably only going to give me back some of them. Tell me how many there really are as well. So inline count, if I say I want the inline count, I will get back my 100 movies, but inside the results, I will know that there is actually 100,000 records, which is useful if you want to kind of present some sort of UI that says, hey, you've just got the first page of 100 pages or 1,000 pages or something. As I said, because we're based on Atom Pub and kind of the REST ideas as well, they associate very clear semantics with the different HTTP methods. So put means kind of replace. That's replace semantics. So when I put to a URL, I'm replacing the thing that was previously there, or the resource that was previously there. So that's an attempt to update. Post, usually when I'm doing a post, I'm inserting into a collection of some sort. So that's the way typically to insert. Delete, well, I think we all know what delete means. And get, well, we've been doing that already. That's for querying. Because of the relationships in the model, the OData protocol defines conventions for navigating around your model through URIs. So here's an example. Let's imagine that cities have town halls, and town halls have addresses. Well, if I identify a particular city, I can navigate to its town hall and then to its address through the URI. So this is kind of like what we call our URI conventions. often when you have an data and you want to expose that, and you're exposing it through in Atom format, Atom, there are a number of readers out there which can just consume kind of what I would call Atom, the original Atom. And so Atom has a series of well-defined element names, title, summary, that kind of thing. We have a way in OData to specify that you want to map certain kind of data properties to those well-known feed elements. And that's what feed customization does. Big data, I mean, if you've got a lot of data, we've been talking about this previously, this idea of server-driven paging. It allows you to you have heaps of data up there. It allows people to sample your data without them having to think in advance that they don't want to crash your server. Number one, they might be, naive. They might ask a naive question and get back a lot of data. Number two, they might be malicious. So server-driven paging sort of helps in both of those scenarios. And then finally, we also have this ability to do kind of inject query and change interceptors. When people are actually making, this is not really an OData feature. It's more of a feature of WCF data services. But it allows you to kind of intercept the query when it hits the server and maybe add additional constraints to it, maybe because of the security that you've applied, or also to look at the changes as they come up to the server and see if they're appropriate before allowing them through to the database, the underlying data source. OData, though, is kind of there's a spectrum of OData. On the simplest end, an XML file in a well-defined place on a server somewhere, which doesn't support any of the query options. It's just, if I went and got it, I just go and get that XML file. As long as it's in Atom format, or in OData Atom format, that is kind of like a low-end version of OData. So that's the easiest way to get your stuff up. You just create an Atom, an XML file which conforms to the format requirements, and you've got OData. And then you can get your data into things like Power Pivot if you want to. But then going beyond that, there's this idea of SQL Server and the entity framework and data services. That's kind of like our stack for exposing an OData service. What this allows you to do is, you can put your data into a SQL Server box and create an entity framework model to expose that data. And we're going to show you that in the tutorial later on today. And then using data services to expose that entity framework data model to the web as OData. So if you do that, then you get a very sophisticated OData service, which can support not only read, but it also supports query, potentially supports server-driven paging, supports updates, and all those extra things that you might want. You can also write custom data sources with WCF data services too. So you don't have to use the entity framework and SQL Server. You could write your own provider and go against any data source that you can turn into the correct shapes. So there's an API that allows you to do that. Or failing that, you can even write, you can write a completely custom OData service using whatever language is appropriate for you. And all you need to do is follow the spec, the OData spec, which is, up on odata.org. There are already some frameworks out there that do that. So there's one for Java called OData 4J, and there's another one for Ruby called OData on Rails. This kind of comes back to the question earlier about kind of what you can do and how, do I just look at this document and try and infer how to interact with it? There are a lot of libraries available today for different platforms in OData. So we've got .NET and Silverlight, that's WCF Data Services. We have JavaScript. So there's a library that we recently put out called Data.js, which gives you a very good experience interacting with an OData service through JavaScript. There's PHP libraries, including one specifically for Joomla and Drupal. There's Java, iOS, and Ruby, and people are developing these things all the time. So I'm sure there are more as well. On the consumer side, so libraries are kind of consumers as well because people could write a consumer using one of those libraries. But there are sort of applications that are already out there that can consume OData. So we just saw Montego. That's not out there yet, but it's coming soon. Excel, or at least Power Pivot. And that's kind of like I think that's our the showcase consumer today. But there's also Tableau, and we're going to show you a Tableau later on, which is an excellent reporting tool, which allows you to create whiz-bang looking reports very easily. Another one called Pebble reports, and these are just appearing all the time. There are also some generic kind of OData consumers. My esteemed colleague Bunny has written one called OData Explorer. In fact, he's written about three or four versions of OData Explorer. One for the phone, one for kind of like Silverlight, and so, I encourage you to have a look at that. But there are other examples of the same sort of thing. And on the producer side, we've got Christian here. I think I saw him just a second ago. I'm assuming he wandered around the back somewhere, who's going to be talking about data market soon. There are a whole raft of Microsoft products that are producing OData. SAP is going to be taking all of their data and exposing it through OData format. There are a lot of content management systems that are starting to expose their data as OData. In fact, if you go to the OData.org and look at there's a place on OData.org called Producers. If you go there, you'll be able to see a whole long list of different people that have actually exposed data through OData. Along with that, there are a raft of government agencies and scientific ventures. I don't even know what the correct word for some of these things that are exposing their data through OData format as well. Now, I just wanted to kind of before we kind of go too far, I wanted to sort of think about where we are today with OData and where we're going. So today we have an excellent format for exchanging data over HTTP in both directions, getting it and updating it. We also have this idea of a set of URI conventions and a way to express queries against data. There are a number of, we have representations for, the structured data itself and the links between the data. So you can kind of, this is, I don't know if you are familiar with the REST concept of HATOS, or hypermedia. Hypermedia is the engine of application state, is what that kind of little HATOS thing stands for. The idea here is that you go and get something, and what you get back tells you what you can do next. Okay? And in fact, if you look at Atom, and what we were looking at before when we looked at those, when I went and got a title from Netflix, if I looked at the links in there, the links tell me what I could do next. Okay? So it's like, okay, you've got this title. If you want to find out the audio for this title, this is where you go. We support CRUD, or create, read, update, delete operations. We give you metadata if you want to create classes that can, make it easier for programmers to consume the data service or update the data service. And so we've got a kind of a good foundation, but as we go forward, we're always thinking about what's next. But it's very important when you do that sort of thing, when you have a protocol like OData where the ecosystem and the breadth of the ecosystem is so important to the success of the protocol, that you have a set of you make your decisions about what you add to the protocol in a very principled way. And I mean, I think this is kind of something that we have to keep coming back to as a kind of a team working on the OData protocol. We have to remember that being a simple protocol is almost our biggest feature. So every time we add a new feature, we've just diminished from one of our bigger features. So it has to be for a good reason. The key thing is that we must keep the simple scenarios. So if I'm in Excel and I just want to grab down some data so I can run some reports inside Excel, we've got to make sure that remains easy when we add new features. We don't want to break existing consumers and producers of OData by adding new features to the protocol. So, and part of this is, if you have to implement 50 features to become a valid OData producer or consumer, then the protocol is, is in trouble. Having said that, that's kind of like the caveat about the things that we're thinking about, how we have to kind of constrain our thinking. But we are thinking a lot about things in the future. The first one I want to talk about is this idea of any and all. So today, if you look at OData services that are exposed version 2 of OData, which is kind of what we're up to right now, then you can ask a series of queries, but there is a certain set of queries that are very hard to ask, in fact, impossible. So we've added this idea to do kind of any-all queries. And the idea of any-all is that you can ask a query something like this. You could say, hey, I want to get all the movies where any of the actors in the movie has won an Oscar. That's what I would call an any-all kind of query. Today, you can't ask that question with the OData protocol, but in version 3 of the protocol, you will be able to. Vocabularies, if you're familiar with the semantic web community, which I'm sure a lot of you are, then you'll probably be familiar with this concept. This is the idea of, there is some kind of shared understanding of common things. And so while the protocol itself might not understand a particular, let's say domain, like, say, geoscience or something, there may be a vocabulary which you can layer on top of the protocol so that if there is a producer, someone that's producing OData, that is producing geo data, and a consumer who is specifically designed to consume geodata, they can work together at a kind of a higher level of fidelity than the protocol would allow otherwise. So I've got a little demo of that, which I'll show you in a second. In fact, no, I don't have a little demo because it's on the other machine, and the other machine is toast. So if you're interested in the little demo, I invite you to come and see me afterwards, and I'll show you on my laptop. We're also looking at adding spatial support. So there are a lot of consumers of OData which are already kind of leveraging spatial today. Things like, just simple things like latitude and longitude. And then they'll do things like project those onto maps and things like that. In fact, there's a client out there, a generic OData client called Sesame, which will, when it sees a data feed, and it pulls it down, it presents a series of different tabs that you can look at that data through. You can sort of look at it through a grid. You can look at it as XML or JSON. And then if it recognizes that any of the fields might be a location, it also gives you another tab. It gives you the map view. So but it's doing that via heuristics, right? It's like looking at it and going, this column, this column is called address, and this is the street, and so forth. Vocabularies or either vocabularies or full spatial support would allow for you to do that without it being based on heuristics. So the consumer and the client, the consumer and the producer would advertise that it's a spatial piece of data, and the consumer would know, rather than having to infer.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Does this conception here, earlier we were talking about Worldwide Telescope and the geoscience community, and so we tend to work in terms of polygons, things that have a distributed spatial extent. Yes. And is that part of your roadmap, your planning to look at entities that are not simply latitude, longitude points, but actually a river system or something? Yeah, so that's actually under debate at the moment. Right now. So we are looking to expose the full gamut of polygons and things like that SQL Server can support. Mm-hmm. The question is, how much of that will we allow you to query through the OData protocol? Can we let the people in the room vote on that? I'm pretty sure I know where they're going to vote. But yes, you can. Everybody put your hands up. You want it, I know. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think it's just a case of deciding how far to go with that feature. Right. Yeah, I think everybody in the room should contribute to that discussion on the form, OData form. Yeah, make your votes heard. Yeah, make your votes heard. Then you can make your voice heard. Right now, there is a spatial support discussion actively. Yes, exactly. So there's a mailing list. If you go to odata.org, there's a mailing list you can join
when you join that mailing list, you should straight away jump on the spatial discussion and say, we need that feature.
Right. Yeah. Right now, I look at some of the examples that some people showed. You can probably do better. So go there and then make comments at least.
Yeah. Another thing we hear a lot is OData. We put it into Atom format, and Atom format, let's be fair, has a fair bit of bloat associated with it. JSON's better, but it's still quite bloated, right? In the sense that there's a lot of metadata with every record. So every single piece of data you pull back has the metadata kind of repeated. So there is a lot of discussion internally around how we come up with an efficient format that is still easy to understand. Okay, so we don't want to come up with some really complicated binary encoding. And so, again, if you're interested in that discussion, there is a proposal on the OData mailing list, which you should kind of weigh in on.
I have a question.
Yes?
Does OData support any of the update functionality or just selected?
So the question is, does OData support update? And the answer is absolutely. OData does. Not all OData services do. But OData, the protocol, does. So it's kind of the choice of the producer of the data. Do they allow you to update it?
How do the transactions work in OData update?
So the question is, how do transactions work in OData update? And the answer to that is, the protocol itself doesn't define a transaction semantic. But however, there is a batching semantic. So you can batch a series of requests together, and typically, a server will take the batch of requests and put them into a transaction. But that is not mandated by the protocol. Okay? So there is a way to batch requests together, send them to the server, and have them executed together. In fact, WCF Data Services, if you do this through WCF Data Services, it is a transaction. Okay? Well, there was my demo. Pretty exciting, but I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to give it to you. So I've got 5 more minutes, and what I'm going to do now is just talk about the outline of what Fanny and I are going to walk through this afternoon. So we're going to pull some data into SQL, into a SQL server. And that data is actually going to be some BP oil spill data that Jan put us onto, because it's like, okay, this is something that you guys can relate to. It's like it's real scientific data. We're going to manipulate it a little bit so that it becomes a little bit more, easy to consume, a little bit easier to share as OData. We're then going to walk you through exposing that from the database all the way out to the web. And we do that in layers. We'll run some queries across that stuff, get what we need, manipulate it, get a feel for whether we've got the right things. Then we'll analyze that data in both Excel and Tableau. So that's what's coming up this afternoon. So stay posted, because that's going to be some cool stuff. Because even though the rest of the team ignores Fanny, you are not allowed to. And we're not going to do that. So anyway, that's kind of what's going. Oh, sorry about that. So I was wondering, is there any questions? Yes.
What do we have existing adapters?
Let's just wait for the mic.
Yeah.
Do we have any sys adapters for OData interface?
Say that again, sorry.
Sys data connection adapters for OData? Because right now everything goes...
Data. What?
Sys, integration services. Because right now, integration services HTTP or regular HTTP. Does OData interface can be just interacted with the HTTP interface, or will it require a special data adapter?
So OData is a HTTP bound protocol. So OData does. I am aware of someone inside Microsoft actually created a bridge to SSIS as a provider for OData. So, and if you look on the the OData.org producers page, or it's either the producers page or the SDK, I can't remember where, you'll be able to find that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. As I said, I invite you to come and look at my machine to have a look at the demo if you're interested on vocabularies. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.